Okay, so today we finished up with the Irish question. So we're going to start with the Eastern question. 1870, so we're going to backtrack a little bit. Remember, we're trying to bring everyone up to the eve of World War One. And so, returning to the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, we kind of left it, still crippled there. Receded into southeastern Europe. A constant state of crisis will begin to exist in the Balkans over who would control this region. And so, as you can see here, the Balkan area is going to be very mountainous over by the Crimean. We've got lots of problems still going on today there because of all these different ethnicity, languages, and groups. So, same problems we're going to have at this time period will kind of culminate, and darn it, while we're having some issues in that part of the world today. But at this time period, Russia's dream, since the reign of Catherine the Great, had been to retake the Balkans and ultimately Constantinople, the old capital of the Byzantine Empire and the cradle of Orthodox Christianity. When we talked about they wanted to make, that third Rome. Versing them, though, is another group of individuals who feel that they have the right to stake the claim to the Balkans, and that is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What has designs on the region as well, right there. So if you remember, 1877 to 1878, we'd had the Russo-Turkish War, and this is going to lead Russia to even further believe that they should have the right to the Balkan area. They're going to emphasize, or what the Russians believe is in Pan-Slavism, which is the idea of uniting all Slavs in Europe under one government. And what government would they want to lead that? Well, of course, themselves, Russia. They kind of see themselves as the parental unit of all of these Slavic little nations here. So if you remember that Russo-Turkish War, Russia's military victory there over the Ottoman Empire had put them in a position to dominate the Balkans. But Great Britain, wanting to keep Russia away from the West, had refused to accept Russian control of the Balkans and sent the Royal Navy to help the Turks. And we talked about that in Unit 7.1. Nationalistic spirit in Britain at this time will become known as jingoism from a poem. This is really just kind of hyper-nationalism, kind of bullying nationalism, bully to get what you want done. And Bismarck is actually going to step in at this time to try to mediate this crisis. So the Russians wanting to come in. So we're going back to the time where Bismarck is still in power. This will become known as the Congress of Berlin. So this is where Bismarck's going to step in between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Britain, and Russia, with the Congress of Berlin in 1878. So with Bismarck at the helm here, we are going to see Russia gain little from the conference despite defeating the Turks in the war. The provisions of this Congress, or of this mediation, are the recognition of Romania, Serbia, Montenegro as independent states. Still problems today, like I mentioned before, kind of from this time period, from this era of the Congress of Berlin. We'll see the establishment of the autonomous Principality of Bulgaria. So it's autonomous, but it will still be included with the Ottoman Empire. The Austrian acquisition of Bosnia and Herzegovina will happen at this time. We'll see the transfer of Cyprus to Great Britain, not far from the Suez Canal. And though Disraeli, remember from Great Britain, was most responsible for the agreements, so he actually took the lead in kind of leaving Russia out of things. Russia is actually going to blame Bismarck, because Bismarck had kind of stepped up and said, hey, I'll help manage these, even though it's Disraeli that's going to make sure that Russia doesn't get the things that would make Great Britain worry. They want to keep Russia away from the West. Just a side note here, it's at this time period that Russia sells Alaska to us for $7 million. They kind of think it's just a piece of ice and worthless, and we've definitely gotten our $7 million back at this point, so great purchase. And so how this is kind of bringing us up to the eve of World War I is that Russian hostility towards Germany it led Bismarck 1879 to embark upon a new system of alliances which will transform European diplomacy and effectively kill the remnants of the concert of Europe. And we talked about, those alliances that Bismarck will set up before his removal. And this is all kind of stemming from the hostility that Germany has towards Russia. And we're going to see, of course, Germany and Russia are going to kind of end up on some opposite sides here. So this is definitely setting us up for the eve of World War I. Note here, we are going to come up upon the Berlin Conference, which you should not confuse with the Congress of Berlin. The Berlin Conference is going to come up in regards to imperialism and the guidelines upon which to carve up Africa, where the Congress of Berlin is the negotiation that's going to settle, well, I guess not use the word settle, mediate the conference between the Turks and the Russians. And so we'll leave off there with that, Eve, and we'll move into a group that we've left coming up in power in France and Germany and a little bit in England, which is the Socialist Party, socialist movements. All right, so we have talked about socialism a lot, but kind of coming back to recap where we're leaving off in each kind of nation now. So socialist movements in the age of mass politics was largely a negative response to industrialism, so the negative impacts of industrialism, but also to nationalism. Because remember, socialism is internationalist. Marx didn't say, hey, workers of France unite. He said workers of the world unite. And so it's a response to this kind of nationalist urge that's driven Italy together, it's driven Germany together. Like, ooh, don't be a German first, be a worker first, and overthrow the chains that bind you. So main goal of socialist movements was to advance the cause of the proletariat or working class throughout Europe. We've seen that. Like I just said, they saw nationalism as a tool used by the ruling classes to divert public attention away from social issues. And at this time period, right up to World War I, they were generally opposed to war prior to World War I, since the working class disproportionately suffered casualties on the front lines. But as we go forward, we're going to see kind of a change. Remember, Marxism had led the negative response to industrialism. The Socialists will unite in 1864 to form the First International, and Marx was one of the principal organizers. The growth of the socialist parties after 1871 was phenomenal. Remember, we talked about Germany and the SPD. Also, France, Belgium, and Austria-Hungary are big socialist nations. In 1883, socialists are going to be exiled from Russia. So I don't really understand. I mean, Russia had the smallest working class. It was like, so I don't know. But they send their socialists away, and they end up in Switzerland, where socialism then will grow in Switzerland immensely. So then revisionism we mentioned briefly today in our lecture. It is not like Marxism. We talked about it a little bit with England. So as workers started to gain the right to vote, in France we have universal suffrage. In England we saw universal suffrage today, and participate politically in the nation state, their attention is going to then focus more on elections than on revolutions. So circle that, more on elections than on revolutions. They figured, hey, we outpopulate the rich, so if you give all of us the right to vote, we will, take everything over by having the most votes. So we're going to kind of see this almost like, evolution rather than revolution thing. Because they're, somebody like, let's rise up and unite workers. Like, I just got like that 5-cent raise, man. We just voted that in. Worker standard of living will actually rise substantially after 1850, thus no need to revolt as well. Labor unions that are going to get you that 5-cent raise will be allowed. In France, Jean Jaurès is formally reputed revisionist doctrines in order to establish a unified socialist party, though he remained at heart a revisionist in practice. So just some names to know. The main one you need to know here is Edouard Bernstein. He gave us Evolutionary Socialism in 1899. That is his work, and he's the most prominent of the socialist revisionists. He argued that Marx's predictions of ever greater poverty for workers and ever greater concentration of wealth in fewer hands had proved false. He's like, no, look, the workers are getting better, labor unions are getting us stuff. Marx was wrong. We don't need to unite and rise up. The impact of socialism on European politics became profound. We've already discussed this. Just write review here. German Socialist Democratic Party we talked about. In France, we talked about the socialists led by Jean Jaurès gaining seats in Chamber of Deputies. England, the Fabian Society we talked about after the Roman general Fabius, and his stalling techniques and how England's kind of like that teapot. In 1893, Keir Hardie is going to lead the Independent Labour Party that rapidly became a vocal third party. We talked about that. Foundations of social welfare state, we talked about that, created in Germany and in France a decade before World War I, meant to guarantee each citizen with a decent standard of living. And so we're seeing, we're getting all of these things without having to openly revolt. But there is one group that's not going to give up on this getting rid of government thing. Remember, Marx would have said, at the end of it, it's just all about uniting and overthrowing the government and classless society. We are going to see a group here of anarchists who absolutely want no government. They spun off from the mainstream socialist movement and go even more extreme, and they sought to destroy the centralized state. They want the state to wither away, the government to go. Mikhail Bakunin, 1814 to 1878, a Russian nobleman, is going to become the most influential of the anarchists. And anarchy, we will see, will be the strongest in Spain and Italy. Bakunin would say that anything that gets rid of the government is moral or good and you should do it. And so he would therefore say that like even a terrorist act against the government that would make the government fall is a good thing and you should do it, and it would be wrong not to. So he mean very anarchist. This is going to be the kind of train of thought that lead to several political assassinations by anarchists that will shake the political world, with the deaths of 6 national leaders between 1881 and 1901. Individuals such as Alexander II of Russia, assassinated in 1881, King Umberto I of Italy in 1900, and President William McKinley of the United States in 1901. So all of these due to anarchists in trying to rid individuals of the state or government. And so that's where we're going to leave off. Just a short one for this weekend, just to catch us up with with socialism, the Eastern question, just a little intermediate area there before we go back to the East. Pick up with Russia. What's going to go on? What happens to Alexander II? Why is he assassinated? And answer some questions about what Russia's been doing since the Crimean War. What's happening there? And that will be our last lecture of Unit 7.2. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. See